The sterile white walls of the hospital room felt like a cold, suffocating cage. Emma sat by her mother's bedside, her hands trembling as she clutched a crumpled tissue, trying to wipe away the tears that seemed to come unbidden. Her mother, once vibrant and full of life, now lay pale and frail, a shadow of the woman she'd once been. The machines beeped rhythmically, a constant reminder of how little time they had left. "Mom," Emma whispered, her voice cracking. "I promise, I'll do anything. I'll find a way. Please don't leave me." Her voice faltered as she leaned forward, brushing a stray lock of hair from her mother's forehead. But her mother didn't respond. In the silence, Emma's thoughts raced. The mounting medical bills were crushing her, desperate bills she couldn't pay on her own. She'd been trying for months to juggle work, hospital visits, and the sheer emotional weight of seeing her mother fade away. But it wasn't enough. Nothing she did seemed to be enough. And every time she thought about the looming reality of losing her mother, the fear and guilt gnawed at her insides. Then, the door opened, and a tall figure stepped into the room, dressed in a dark, tailored suit, his presence commanding, almost unsettling in its authority. He had the sharp, chiseled features of a man who was accustomed to getting what he wanted, his eyes cold but calculating as they landed on Emma. "Miss Emma," the man said, his voice smooth as silk but with an edge of something far colder. "We need to talk." Emma blinked, wiping her eyes quickly. She had no idea who this man was, but something about the way he looked at her, the way his gaze lingered, sent a shiver down her spine. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. He didn't answer her question right away. Instead, he walked toward her mother's bed, his gaze falling on the older woman with a brief flicker of something. Sympathy? Emma couldn't tell. "My name is Alexander Wainwright," he said, his voice unwavering, "and I can offer you a solution to your problem." Emma frowned, her stomach tightening. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Your mother's medical bills, your debts. I can take care of all of it," he continued, his tone clipped. "But I need something in return." Emma stared at him, disoriented, unsure whether she was dreaming or caught in a nightmare. "What do you mean, something in return?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander's eyes darkened, his gaze intense. "I'm proposing a marriage contract. You marry me, and I will pay off your mother's bills. I'll give her the best medical care money can buy. I will make sure she gets the treatment she deserves. In exchange for your commitment. Nothing more, nothing less." The words felt like a punch to the gut, leaving her gasping for air. "What?" she cried out, disbelief flooding her veins. "You can't be serious." "I am," he said calmly. "You need the money. I need a wife for a business arrangement. A year-long contract. No emotions, no expectations. Just a formal partnership. You get the money you need, and I get what I want." His gaze softened slightly as he looked at her, and for a brief moment, Emma swore she saw a flicker of something more, something far deeper, beneath the surface. But then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. She shook her head, trying to process the bizarre proposition. "You want me to marry you for money?" she asked incredulously. "That's insane." "It's a business arrangement," he said simply. "But it's not just about money. It's about saving your mother's life." Emma felt a mix of anger and disbelief bubble to the surface. "Why do you even care?" she demanded. "You're a billionaire. You probably don't even know the first thing about my life or my struggles." "I don't," he replied coolly. "But I do know that if you don't act fast, your mother will not survive, and you'll be left with nothing but the crushing weight of regret." She took a shaky breath, stepping back, her mind reeling. She didn't want to admit it, but the offer lingered in the back of her mind. Her mother was slipping away, and there was no way she could pay for the treatment herself. She had nothing left to lose. But the cost of this solution felt high. too high. The thought of marrying a man like Alexander Wainwright, someone so detached and enigmatic, was terrifying. And yet, wasn't that exactly what she needed? A solution, no matter how imperfect? Her heart pounded in her chest as she forced herself to meet his gaze. "And what do you get out of it?" she asked softly, suspicion in her voice. Alexander's lips curled into a faint smile, his eyes unreadable. "You'll find out soon enough, Miss Emma." The weight of his words hung in the air like a dark cloud, and in that moment, Emma knew there was no turning back. This wasn't just a marriage contract. It was a choice that would change everything. But what choice did she really have? "Will you accept my offer?" he asked, his gaze never leaving hers. Emma stood frozen, her pulse racing. The question hung in the air like a dark promise, one she was too afraid to refuse, but too afraid to accept. She glanced at her mother, lying there so vulnerable and fragile. The only thing Emma cared about was saving her. But what was she willing to sacrifice in order to do so? Would she marry a man she barely knew, in exchange for her mother's life? She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. And when she opened them again, her decision was made. "I'll do it," she whispered, her voice steady despite the turmoil raging inside her. "I'll marry you." Alexander's smile deepened, but it was cold, calculating. "Good. We'll start the arrangements immediately." As the door clicked shut behind him, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something far darker and more complex than she could have ever imagined. She had agreed to marry him for her mother's sake, but what did this man really want from her? And would she be able to protect her heart and her soul once she was bound to him by the terms of their contract? Her mind was swirling, but one thing was clear. She had just stepped into a world that was beyond her control, and she wasn't sure if she would make it out unscathed. Welcome, listeners. Before we continue, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from. Now, let's begin. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, paperwork, and logistics. Emma had barely enough time to process what she had done before the whirlwind of Alexander Wainwright's world engulfed her. Her mother's condition was worsening, and with every phone call, every text from doctors, it felt like the world was collapsing around her. She had signed the contract. She had agreed to marry Alexander, a man she still didn't fully understand. And now, she was bound to him, her future tied to his in ways she had never imagined. But as she sat in her modest apartment the night before the wedding, staring at the contract in her hands, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She wasn't sure what she had expected from the man who had made the offer, but she certainly hadn't expected this level of cold efficiency. Every time she tried to ask him about the details of the arrangement, about why he was doing this, he deflected with a smile and a promise that all would be revealed in time. "Time," she muttered under her breath, her fingers absently tracing the edge of the thick document. A year. Just a year, and then she'd be free. Free of this strange contract, free of him. It seemed so simple when she thought of it like that, yet everything about it felt anything but simple. The clock on her wall ticked away, its rhythm steady, relentless, a constant reminder that tomorrow was the day. She looked down at the contract again. The date of the wedding was set for noon, tomorrow, and every detail was meticulously arranged, down to the flowers, the venue, the guest list. It was all so formal, so impersonal. She wasn't sure how she was supposed to feel. Excited? Scared? Confused? Was it even possible to feel any real emotion for a man like Alexander? Her phone buzzed, breaking her from her thoughts. It was a message from her best friend, Sophia. Sophia. "Are you sure about this, Em? This is big. I mean, marrying a stranger for a contract? I don't know. This feels off. Are you really okay with all of this?" Emma sighed and typed back, her fingers hovering over the screen for a moment before she responded. Emma. I don't have a choice. Mom needs the treatment. She's all I have left. I'll figure the rest out. There was a long pause before Sophia's reply came through. Sophia. I get it. But just don't forget about yourself in all of this, okay? You deserve more than this. Just promise me you won't lose yourself to him. Emma felt a lump form in her throat as she read those words. She didn't want to lose herself. But could she really make it through this year, staying true to herself? Or would this contract change everything in ways she hadn't yet considered? The next morning, Emma stood in front of her bathroom mirror, her hands shaking as she tried to adjust the wedding dress that had been delivered to her apartment the night before. The dress was simple, elegant, even, but it felt foreign to her, like she was stepping into someone else's life. The fabric clung to her body in all the right ways, but she couldn't quite bring herself to appreciate it. Her mother had been unconscious for the past few days, too weak to even speak. Emma had hoped her mother would wake up, would offer her blessing, or her protest, anything. But the hospital called just that morning with more bad news. It seemed the treatments they'd tried were no longer working. The guilt felt suffocating. Here she was, preparing for a wedding that was anything but romantic, while her mother lay fighting for her life, alone in that sterile room. Would she even be able to tell her about the wedding? Emma wondered. It seemed like such a small thing in comparison to what her mother was enduring. The doorbell rang, snapping Emma from her thoughts. She took a deep breath and smoothed her hands over the fabric of her dress. There was no going back now. She opened the door to find a well-dressed butler standing in the hallway, holding a silver tray with a single ornate box resting on top. Miss Emma, the man said, his tone respectful but distant. Mr. Wainwright has sent this for you. Emma blinked, confused. For me? What is it? A gift for the occasion, the butler replied. He didn't explain further. Instead, he placed the tray in her hands and turned, leaving without a word. With trembling fingers, Emma opened the box. Inside was a delicate bracelet, a silver chain adorned with a small sapphire pendant. It was beautiful, almost painfully so, and yet the gesture felt strange. Why would Alexander send her a gift for their contract wedding? Was it to soften the deal? Or was it just another step in the performance he expected her to put on? She didn't have time to dwell on it, though. It was time. She had to leave for the venue. She had to face him. As she entered the limousine, the city skyline stretched out before her, bathed in the soft glow of the morning sun. Emma tried to steady her breathing, but her pulse was still racing. She'd never been one to dream of weddings, never been one to fantasize about grand ceremonies or fairy tale endings. But today, this was her reality. The car felt suffocating, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was trapped in some twisted version of a dream. When the limousine pulled up to the venue, a lavish, gleaming mansion tucked away in the hills, Emma's stomach twisted. Everything was too perfect, too pristine. It didn't feel like a real wedding. It didn't feel like her life. As the door opened, she was greeted by the sight of a pristine garden, white flowers lining the walkway leading up to the grand entrance. People in tuxedos and elegant dresses milled about, preparing for the ceremony. Everything looked like it had been ripped from the pages of a glossy magazine. And then there was Alexander. He stood at the altar, his dark eyes scanning the crowd, his sharp jawline set in a stoic expression. He was every bit the powerful billionaire CEO, the kind of man who never had to ask for anything, who got what he wanted with a mere glance. But today, there was something different about him. His eyes seemed expectant, almost as though he were waiting for her to make the first move. The moment their eyes met, the world seemed to slow. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, Emma thought she saw something flicker in his gaze, a flicker of recognition, a flicker of something more. Could it be? Could he have known all along? But before she could process the thought, the ceremony began, and she was swept into the performance that had been orchestrated for her. Her life, her choices, felt distant and far removed from what was happening around her. The ceremony was over in a blur. Emma barely remembered the vows they exchanged, barely remembered the distant formal smiles she managed to force as the audience cheered. All she could focus on was the weight of the sapphire bracelet Alexander had given her, now resting heavily on her wrist like an anchor to a world she wasn't sure she wanted to be a part of. They'd barely spoken since the moment she stepped into the venue. Alexander had kept his distance, his cold professionalism never faltering. As soon as the ceremony ended, he excused himself from the crowd, offering a brief nod to Emma before turning away to speak with his business associates. It was clear. This wasn't a wedding for him. It was a transaction, a deal. And yet, as Emma watched him mingle with his guests, there was something about the way he carried himself, something in the way his eyes flickered back to her now and then, that made her wonder if the man who stood before her was truly as indifferent as he appeared. The reception hall was a sea of faces, most of them unfamiliar to her. Rich, influential people, many of them tied to Alexander's vast business empire, filled the space with idle chatter and laughter, their lives worlds apart from the small, quiet life Emma had known. She could feel the disparity, feel the cold, unspoken judgment in their gazes as they looked her over, as though she were just a pawn in this elaborate game. She should have been used to it by now. She'd spent years working for her survival, sacrificing, scraping by. But today, in this glamorous foreign world, it felt different. It felt as though she were out of place. Alexander's voice broke through the noise, a low murmur that seemed to draw everyone's attention as he stepped beside her, offering her a glass of champagne. His presence was like a shadow looming over her. Cold. Powerful. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you hadn't signed that contract?" he asked, his voice soft but purposeful, the hint of an enigmatic smile playing on his lips. Emma's heart skipped a beat. The question was unexpected, almost too personal for someone who barely knew her. "What do you mean?" she replied, trying to keep her tone neutral, though she could feel the flush creeping up her neck. She wasn't sure if he was teasing her, or if this was just another layer of his careful manipulation. He took a sip of his drink, his gaze never leaving hers. "You had a choice, Miss Emma," he said, his eyes gleaming as he watched her, studying her every reaction. "You didn't have to marry me, but you did. And now you're here, wearing that bracelet I gave you, playing the part of the dutiful bride. I'm just curious. How does it feel?" Her breath caught in her throat, a chill running down her spine. She wasn't sure if he was mocking her, testing her, or if something deeper was at play here. The tension between them was palpable, thick in the air. "I'm doing what I have to do," she replied, her voice steady despite the unease creeping in. "You're keeping your end of the bargain. My mother's medical bills are being taken care of. That's all that matters." For a brief moment, she thought she saw something flicker in his eyes, something warm, something unexpected. But just as quickly, it was gone. He gave her a small nod, as though satisfied with her answer. "Good," he said. "Let's keep it that way." And just like that, he turned and walked away, leaving Emma standing alone with a half-empty glass of champagne, her heart racing in her chest. The days that followed the wedding passed in a blur. Emma tried to settle into her new life, trying to convince herself that this arrangement was temporary, that it was only for a year. She went through the motions, attending events, meeting business associates of Alexander's, and spending time in the grand mansion that now felt more like a gilded cage than a home. Every day was a reminder that she was a mere visitor in this world of wealth and power. But there was something that she couldn't shake. The way Alexander's gaze lingered on her, the way his presence seemed to fill the room, even when he wasn't speaking. He wasn't the cold, indifferent man he'd appeared to be at first. There was something else there, something hidden beneath the surface. It was a few days after the wedding, during one of the many formal dinners Alexander hosted at the mansion, that the truth finally began to emerge, although not in the way Emma had expected. The guests were gathered around a long, polished dining table, laughter and conversation echoing through the room. Emma sat at the end, trying to keep to herself, feeling like an outsider among these well-dressed strangers. Alexander, as always, was the center of attention, his sharp wit and charisma drawing everyone in. But as the night wore on, Emma noticed something different about him. He wasn't just the CEO anymore. There was something more personal about his interactions with her, a subtle but undeniable shift in the way he looked at her when their eyes met. At one point, as the meal ended and dessert was served, Alexander walked over to her, his expression unreadable. He leaned down slightly, his voice low enough that only she could hear him. "I'm not the man you think I am," he said, his voice tinged with something Emma couldn't quite place. It wasn't a threat, not quite, but it wasn't reassurance either. "What do you mean?" Emma asked, her curiosity piqued, but her heart still guarded. "You've been looking at me like I'm some kind of monster," he continued, his gaze piercing. "Like I'm using you, taking advantage of you. But you don't know the full story. You don't know why I made this arrangement." His voice softened, almost imperceptibly. "I'm not just here to save your mother's life, Emma. I'm here for a reason that goes beyond that. And you need to know the truth, whether you want to or not." Before Emma could respond, he was gone again, swept up by another conversation with one of his associates. Her mind was reeling. What was he talking about? What truth was he hiding from her? For the first time since she'd signed the contract, Emma realized that she didn't know who this man really was. She didn't know what his motives were, or what he wanted from her. All she knew was that whatever this was, it was becoming much more complicated than she had ever imagined. The days following that cryptic exchange with Alexander were like walking on a tightrope. Emma's every move seemed scrutinized by the sharp eyes of Alexander and his ever-present staff. At first, it was almost like nothing had changed. She played her part, attending the gala events, the business meetings, the charity functions, all while maintaining the image of the dutiful wife. She kept her distance from Alexander, though, unsure how to approach him after that conversation. But something had shifted between them. She could feel it in the air, like a crackling static before a storm. And the storm was coming. It was late one night, weeks after their wedding, that the storm finally hit. Emma was sitting in the quiet of the mansion's study, flipping through papers for her mother's treatment options. The night was still, the house empty except for the occasional rustle of the wind outside and the soft murmur of a distant television in the next room. She had become used to the silence in the mansion, used to being alone with her thoughts in the grand, empty space. She had just finished going over a set of medical reports when she heard footsteps, heavy and deliberate, approaching the door. She looked up just as it swung open, revealing Alexander standing in the threshold, his silhouette framed by the soft glow of the hallway light. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice smooth but tinged with an undertone of something darker. Emma didn't answer right away. Instead, she simply nodded, her heart fluttering in her chest. What was this? Why was he here at this hour? She had seen him during the day, of course, at meetings and formal functions, but this late-night visit was unusual. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with an easy, practiced movement. His eyes were focused on her, like he was assessing her, trying to gauge her reaction. For the first time since their wedding, Emma felt a flicker of something in his gaze, a mixture of something unreadable and intense, something more than just a businessman. "I thought we should talk," he said, his voice softer than usual. Emma swallowed, trying to steady her nerves. "About what?" He walked toward the large window, his back to her as he gazed out at the city below. For a long moment he was silent, as though contemplating his next words carefully. About us, he said finally, his voice low. I've been thinking about this arrangement, about why I asked you to marry me. And I think you deserve to know the truth. Emma's heart skipped a beat. The truth? He had told her that he wasn't the man she thought he was, but she still didn't know what that meant. What truth could he possibly be hiding? I don't need to know anything more than what's in the contract, Emma replied, her voice cold. She wasn't sure what she was trying to protect, her heart, her dignity, or simply her sanity, but she was desperate to keep control of the situation. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. You think I'm just using you, don't you? He asked, his voice steady. That's what you believe. You think I made this arrangement out of some cold, calculated necessity, that this is just a business deal for me. Emma's breath caught. Isn't it? Wasn't it just that? She opened her mouth to speak, but he cut her off before she could respond. I never wanted this to be like that, he continued, his eyes softening ever so slightly. I never wanted you to feel like you were just a pawn in my game. His words hung in the air, thick with tension, and for the briefest moment, Emma felt something shift, something that told her there was more to this than just the contract. She didn't know how or why, but she felt it. A pang in her chest, a strange mixture of hope and dread. I didn't ask you to marry me just to save your mother's life, he said, stepping closer to her, his gaze steady but intense. That was part of it, yes. But there's more. I've been watching you for a long time, Emma. Before this arrangement. Long before you ever signed that contract. The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. He'd been watching her? Was he telling the truth? And if so, what did it mean? Why hadn't he told her this sooner? She took a step back, trying to process his words. What are you talking about? Watching me? I don't... Alexander stepped forward, closing the distance between them. His presence was overwhelming now, like a force of nature she couldn't escape. Before you signed that contract, I was already trying to find a way to help you, to get close to you. His voice dropped to a whisper. I've wanted you for a long time, Emma. She froze, her heart slamming against her ribs. The room seemed to spin around her as his words echoed in her mind. He wanted her? But why? She whispered, almost choking on the question. Why would you want me? Alexander's eyes softened, and for the first time she saw something more human in his gaze, something raw, something vulnerable. Because I've been in love with you for a long time. Longer than you could possibly imagine. Emma's breath caught in her throat. The world around her seemed to stop for a moment, and the air between them grew thick with unspoken emotions. Could it be true? Was this some twisted game he was playing, or had she misunderstood everything about him? He stepped closer, his hand reaching out tentatively as though waiting for permission. I never wanted to force you into this. I wanted to protect you, Emma. I never meant to hurt you. Emma shook her head, her thoughts a chaotic swirl. She could feel the pull between them, the chemistry that had always been there, but she had been too blind to see. This wasn't just a business deal. This wasn't just a contract. She took a step back, her mind racing. I don't know what to think anymore, Alexander. Think about what you want, he said quietly, his voice softening. You don't have to keep playing this role, pretending that this is just a transaction. It doesn't have to be like that. We can be more. Emma stood frozen in the moment, torn between fear and something that felt like hope. Could this really be happening? Was he really saying what she thought he was saying? But just as the tension between them reached its peak, a sudden sound, a muffled knock at the door, interrupted them. Emma's heart sank, and the reality of the situation came crashing back down. The door to the study opened, and a figure stepped inside, their face half hidden in the shadows. What do you think of Alexander's confession? Is he truly in love with Emma, or is he just manipulating her for his own reasons? What do you think this means for their future? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The door to the study creaked open, and Emma's heart skipped a beat. She had been so caught up in Alexander's confession that she hadn't noticed the presence of another figure, someone who seemed to step out from the shadows just as the air between her and Alexander grew heavy with tension. The figure was a woman, tall, elegant, and dressed in an expensive black evening gown that shimmered faintly under the soft lighting. Her hair was dark, swept back into a neat, sophisticated updo, and her eyes, sharp and calculating, narrowed at the sight of Emma and Alexander standing so close to one another. She didn't speak immediately, but her presence alone made the room feel smaller, more oppressive. Emma's pulse quickened, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't know who this woman was, but the way Alexander's face tightened at the sight of her sent an immediate chill down her spine. "Is this a bad time?" the woman asked, her voice smooth, with a hint of something dangerously knowing. Alexander's posture stiffened, and for the briefest moment, Emma thought she saw something shift in his eyes, something that wasn't warmth or affection, but cold calculation. "No," he replied quickly, but his tone was clipped, almost defensive. He turned to Emma, his gaze holding hers for just a moment before he spoke again. "Emma, this is Lena Blackwood. I'm his fiancée," Lena interrupted smoothly, her lips curving into a cold smile. "The woman he's really going to marry." Emma felt the blood drain from her face as the words hit her like a slap. Fiancé. She blinked rapidly, trying to process what Lena had just said. Fiancé? How was that possible? A million questions erupted in her mind, but before she could say anything, Alexander's voice cut through the thick silence. "Lena, that's not—" His voice was sharp, but Lena wasn't listening. "You really didn't know, did you?" Lena continued, her eyes locking onto Emma's with an almost mocking pity. "Alexander didn't tell you about me? How typical." She glanced at him, as though waiting for him to confirm her words, but he was silent, his jaw clenched. "You were just a pawn in his little game, Emma. A way to save face, to make sure no one would question his decisions. But in the end, I'm the one he'll marry. You were just a temporary distraction." Emma felt her knees buckle, her head spinning. She looked at Alexander, trying to make sense of the situation. How could he? How could he lie to her like this? "Is this true?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, the lump in her throat choking off her words. "Did you lie to me, Alexander?" For the first time since Emma had met him, Alexander looked genuinely conflicted. His face, usually so unreadable, was now tight with frustration, his eyes flicking back and forth between her and Lena. He hesitated, his mouth opening as if he were about to say something, but the words never came. Instead, he just turned and shot a glare at Lena, his expression darkening. Lena smiled, her gaze never leaving Emma's face. "You didn't really think this was real, did you? He doesn't love you. He never did. He was only ever playing the part." Her voice was dripping with venom now, and Emma could feel her skin crawl with every word. Playing the part. The words echoed in her head as the room seemed to close in around her. Every moment, every word, every glance she'd shared with Alexander now felt like a lie. A performance. A contract. A business deal. Emma's breath hitched. You never told me the truth," she said, her voice trembling with hurt. "This whole time you never told me there was someone else." Alexander took a step toward her, his hand outstretched as though he wanted to reach for her, to apologize, but Emma stepped back, shaking her head in disbelief. "Don't," she said, the word bitter on her tongue. "I don't want to hear it." Lena, still standing with a smug smile, crossed her arms as if she were simply watching a show unfold. "You didn't think he could fall in love with someone like you, did you? This wasn't about love. It was about securing his reputation. And now that he's done with you, you're just a chapter in his past." Time to move on. Emma felt her world collapsing. Everything had been a lie. She had convinced herself that Alexander's strange kindness, his moments of vulnerability, his quiet attention, all of it had meant something. But it was all a facade. He was engaged to someone else. The contract, the wedding, the promises, it had all been for nothing. Her eyes blurred with tears, but she wiped them away quickly, standing taller than she felt. "I'll leave," she said, her voice cold and hard, as though the emotional storm inside her was starting to freeze her from the inside out. "I'll leave now. I don't need this anymore." She turned toward the door, each step feeling heavier than the last, but before she could open it, she heard Alexander's voice again, this time more urgent. "Emma, please don't go," he said, his voice low, but there was no mistaking the desperation in it. "This isn't what you think." "No," she snapped, her voice breaking despite her attempt to remain composed. "Don't tell me it's not what I think because you lied to me, Alexander. All of it, everything, was a lie. I was just your contract bride." Nothing more. She turned the doorknob, her hand trembling, and pushed the door open, stepping into the hallway. She couldn't look back. If she did, she knew she'd lose the resolve she had left. Later that night, Emma sat on the balcony of her small apartment, staring out at the city lights. Her mind was a storm of confusion, anger, and hurt. She had given so much of herself to this man, believed in something that, in the end, had been nothing more than an illusion. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Sophia. "Sophia." "What happened? I just heard the news. Are you okay? Please talk to me." Emma took a deep breath, the weight of the entire situation crashing down on her. She didn't know how to answer her best friend. She didn't even know if she could trust herself to speak. The days that followed the confrontation with Alexander and Lena felt like a blur of pain and confusion. Emma had done everything she could to distance herself from the situation, but the weight of it all was impossible to shake. The lies, the deception, the feeling of being used. She tried to throw herself into work, anything to keep her mind occupied, but every moment of silence seemed to echo with memories of Alexander, the man who had promised to help her, to protect her mother, and yet had never truly been honest with her. The lavish mansion she had once found so beautiful now felt like a prison. The walls, once warm with possibilities, now closed in around her, suffocating her. She stayed in her small apartment most of the time, not wanting to face Alexander or his world ever again. She didn't want to be reminded of the contract, of the betrayal, of the way he had looked at her with those false promises in his eyes. She hadn't heard from him in days, and that was both a relief and a torment. On one hand, she wanted nothing more than to forget he existed. On the other, she couldn't escape the question that kept gnawing at her. Had any of it been real? Her mother's health continued to deteriorate, and Emma's worst fear loomed ever closer. Despite the immense debt that had been cleared by the wedding arrangement, despite the treatment her mother had been receiving, the medical bills had only been a temporary solution. The reality of her mother's condition was overwhelming, and Emma couldn't escape the truth that she might not have much longer to say goodbye. It was during one of these nights, as she sat alone in her apartment, that her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She glanced at it, half expecting another message from Sophia asking how she was holding up. Instead, it was from a number she didn't recognize. Unknown. Number: "Emma, it's Alexander. I need to talk to you. Please come to the office tomorrow. I'm sorry. I'll explain everything." Her heart raced as she read the message. After everything that had happened, after Lena, after the lies, how could he possibly think that she would agree to meet him again? Her first instinct was to delete the message, block his number, and forget this ever happened. But something in his words, "I'm sorry, I'll explain everything," caught her attention. Despite the anger and betrayal flooding her chest, a part of her wondered if she could still find some kind of closure, or at the very least, some kind of answer to the question that had haunted her. Why? Against her better judgment, she found herself typing a response. Emma. Why now, Alexander? You've had all the time in the world. What could you possibly say that would make any of this okay? She sat back, the weight of her words sinking in. A part of her regretted sending the message. What was the point in hearing him out? What if he was just trying to manipulate her again? But the response came quickly, almost too quickly, as though he'd been waiting for her to reach out. Alexander. Please, Emma. I can't explain it all in a text. I just need you to meet me. You owe it to yourself to hear me out. Her hands shook as she stared at the screen. Owe it to myself? After everything he'd put her through, did she really owe him anything? She thought about her mother, about how desperately she needed her, and how she had barely enough strength to keep going as it was. But then she thought about the way he had looked at her when Lena had walked in. The guilt in his eyes. The pain. Was that a man who had been faking it? Was that a man who had been using her from the beginning? And yet, what if there was more to the story? What if she was missing something important? Taking a deep breath, she typed back a response. Emma. Fine. Tomorrow. Noon. Your office. But don't think for a second that this means I forgive you. She pressed send before she could overthink it. The next day, Emma found herself standing in front of the massive glass building that housed Alexander's corporate empire. The world outside felt as cold and indifferent as the skyscrapers that towered over the city, reminding her of everything she had just stepped into, a world that wasn't her own, that had never been her own, and yet somehow she had been forced to navigate it. She entered the building, feeling the eyes of the employees behind desks as she passed them. They all seemed to know her now, and they all seemed to whisper as she walked by. She was no longer just a nameless woman walking in the streets of the city. She was the wife of Alexander Wainwright, the woman who had married the billionaire CEO, albeit under strange and confusing circumstances. She had felt the weight of their judgment at every turn, but it was nothing compared to the storm of emotions swirling inside her. When she reached his office, the door opened before she had a chance to knock. Alexander stood there, his dark eyes looking worn, as though he had barely slept. He was dressed in his usual suit, but there was something different about him today. The usual air of control he always carried with him seemed to have slipped just a little. He looked human. Emma, he said quietly, his voice low, as if afraid to speak too loudly. Thank you for coming. Emma didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped into the office, her gaze sweeping over the sleek, modern space, once so familiar, now just another cold room where she felt like a stranger. I've asked for your forgiveness for a long time, Alexander said, closing the door behind her. He didn't sit at his desk, didn't give her the chance to avoid him. Instead, he stood in front of her, his posture tense. But I don't deserve it. Not yet. Emma took a deep breath, steadying herself. No, you don't, she said softly. You lied to me, Alexander. You told me I was a part of something real, and then you turned around and— I never meant to hurt you, he interrupted, his voice hoarse, filled with regret. I never meant for you to feel like you were just a contract. When I asked you to marry me, it wasn't just to save your mother. It was because I couldn't stand the thought of losing you. I've wanted you. He stopped, his voice faltering, as if he were about to say something even more vulnerable. Emma's breath caught in her chest. The words "I've wanted you" echoed in her mind, reverberating painfully. But you never told me, she whispered, her voice a mixture of anger and heartbreak. You never told me the truth. You let me believe that it was all about the contract, about saving my mother. Alexander stepped closer, his eyes locked with hers. Because I was scared, he said, his voice raw. I was scared that if I told you the truth, you'd hate me. And I didn't want that. I didn't want you to hate me. I never wanted to be the man who lied to you, but I was afraid." Emma swallowed hard, fighting back tears that threatened to spill. She had never seen him like this, so broken, so vulnerable. "You're not the only one who's scared," she whispered. "I gave up everything to be here, Alexander. I gave up my sense of self. I gave up my life." "And I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "But I'm not going to let you walk away from me without telling you the truth. I love you, Emma. I have always loved you." The words hung between them, heavy with the weight of all that had come before. Emma closed her eyes for a moment, her heart racing. She didn't know what to feel. What could she possibly do with this newfound truth? Could she trust him again after everything? The room was still. Emma stood there, staring at Alexander, her mind racing. His words hung in the air, their weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. "I love you. I've always loved you." She had heard those words before, empty words from other men, words spoken when they wanted something from her, words that had always felt like a performance. But this was different. She could see it in his eyes, the raw honesty there. She could feel the trembling vulnerability in his voice, the way his words had faltered as though he was afraid of how she would react. But how could she trust him now? Her pulse quickened as a wave of confusion washed over her. For months, she had convinced herself that this arrangement was just a business deal, nothing more. A lifeline to save her mother, a transaction, a contract. But now, everything had changed. Alexander wasn't just some distant billionaire CEO. He wasn't just the cold businessman who had swept in with an offer she couldn't refuse. He was a man who had been hiding something deep inside him all along. And so had she. For weeks, Emma had tried to keep her heart locked away, guarded, protected from the pain of the truth. She had told herself that she was strong enough to make it through this, that she could survive the emotional roller coaster of the arrangement without getting hurt. But standing here now, hearing Alexander's confession, something inside her began to shift. Something that had been buried for so long finally started to surface. Could she forgive him? Her mother's condition had grown worse, and with that, the pressure to hold everything together had only intensified. But deep down, Emma knew she wasn't just trying to protect her mother anymore. She was trying to protect herself from the overwhelming tide of emotions that had been bubbling just beneath the surface. She was trying to protect herself from feeling, from loving someone who had hurt her, someone she couldn't trust. And yet, as she looked at Alexander, really looked at him, she felt the walls she'd built around her begin to crack. The man standing before her wasn't just a CEO, wasn't just a cold, calculating businessman. He was someone who had made mistakes, who had hurt her, but also someone who, despite it all, was standing here offering the most important thing he could give, his truth. "Why now?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling slightly as the vulnerability she had fought so hard to suppress broke through. "Why are you telling me this now?" Alexander's gaze softened as he took a step closer, his voice low and steady. "Because I can't stand the thought of you walking away thinking I used you. I need you to know that none of this has been easy for me, Emma. I made a mistake when I kept my feelings from you. I thought I was protecting myself, protecting you. But I was wrong." Emma closed her eyes for a moment, letting his words sink in. She wanted to be angry. She wanted to scream at him for making her feel like a fool, for stringing her along in this tangled web of lies and half-truths. But the truth was, she couldn't ignore what was in her heart. Despite everything, despite the pain, despite the deception, she loved him too. The realization hit her like a flood. She hadn't just fallen for the idea of him, or the version of him that had existed in her mind. She had fallen for this. The real man standing before her, flawed and complicated, as human as anyone else. Tears stung her eyes as she looked at him. You don't know how much I've been through, Alexander. How much I've had to sacrifice just to survive. I never wanted this life. I never wanted to feel like I had to give myself away for the sake of someone else. I know, he said softly, his voice full of remorse. And I never wanted you to feel like that. I was a coward. I should have told you the truth from the start. Emma felt her chest tighten. And Lena? What about her? What do you expect me to believe now? Lena. He hesitated, clearly pained by the mention of her name. Lena and I were never what you think. She was part of my past, a relationship that was forced by circumstance. But you, Emma, you're my future. You always have been. I should have fought for you, but I was too scared. I thought I had to protect myself, protect my company, my image. But now, all I want is you. The room seemed to spin as his words hit her. He had been afraid. He had kept her at arm's length because of his own insecurities, his own fears. But here he was now, unguarded, vulnerable, and desperate for her to understand the truth. He loved her. For the first time in weeks, Emma let herself feel the weight of those words. It wasn't just about the money, the contract, the business deal. It wasn't just about saving her mother. She had been blind to the fact that she was allowing herself to be consumed by something else, a desperate need for validation, a desire to prove that she could survive alone. But love wasn't about proving anything. It was about accepting the risk of being hurt and still choosing to fight for the person you cared about. She closed the distance between them, her hands trembling as she reached out, her fingertips brushing his chest. I don't know if I can forgive you right away, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. But I need you to know. I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending that I'm okay when everything is falling apart. Alexander took her hands in his grip firm but gentle. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I'm just asking for a chance. For a real chance to make things right. For us. For the first time in what felt like forever, Emma felt a spark of hope, a spark that had been buried beneath the weight of fear and anger, buried under layers of doubt and insecurity. She didn't know what the future held, but standing here, with Alexander in front of her, she realized something. She was ready to fight for it. For him. For herself. The days after their heart-to-heart in Alexander's office passed in a blur, each one filled with a mixture of uncertainty and hope. Emma had agreed to give him a chance, to listen to him, to understand his side of the story. She didn't know where it would lead, or if it was even possible to rebuild what had been broken. But she was willing to try. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't trying to control the outcome. She was letting herself feel, and for once, that was enough. The hospital called again, the words on the other end of the line heavy with meaning. Her mother's condition had worsened. Time was running out. Emma's heart ached with each passing minute, but she knew that she couldn't just sit by and let everything slip away. She had to do something. And so, when Alexander arrived at her apartment that morning, there was a sense of finality in his eyes. He wasn't just here to apologize anymore. He was here to show her that his feelings, his promises, were real. I've made arrangements, he said quietly, his voice firm but gentle. We'll get your mother the best treatment. I've already secured a top specialist, and I'll make sure she's cared for. Emma's chest tightened, a wave of gratitude rushing over her, but there was a part of her that still resisted. Could she ever truly forgive him for all the lies? For keeping her in the dark about the real reasons behind their marriage? I don't want to take your charity, she said, the words coming out sharper than she intended. This was never about money. I know, he replied, his voice steady. But it was about your mother. And I'm not just doing this for you, Emma. I'm doing it for the woman I love. I know I can't undo the past, but I want to make things right. I want to be with you, not just because of some contract, but because I need you. I've needed you from the very beginning." The words hit Emma like a rush of emotions she hadn't expected. The woman he loves? Had he really said that? Could it be true? She swallowed hard, trying to keep her composure. "But Lena, she's your fiancée. You're supposed to be with her." He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. His grip was strong, his touch warm. "Lena was never my fiancée in the way you think. We were never in love. We were part of a business arrangement, a social obligation. But with you, this is different. This is real, Emma. I've been running from it, but I can't run anymore. Not from you. Not from us." Emma closed her eyes, trying to process everything he had said. She had known deep down that there was more to the story, but hearing it from him now, the man she had once considered a stranger, felt like a strange mixture of pain and relief. "You're not asking for forgiveness, are you?" she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "You're asking for a second chance." "Please," he whispered, his forehead resting against hers. "Give me that chance. I'll prove to you that I'm not the man I was. I'll show you every day that you mean everything to me." Emma felt a warmth spreading through her, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. She was scared, scared of being hurt, scared of being deceived again. But she realized in that moment that love was about vulnerability. It was about risking everything to build something real. "I want to believe you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to believe that we can be something real." His lips brushed against her forehead in a gentle kiss, a promise. "We will be, Emma. I'll make sure of it." But just as Emma felt the tension in her chest begin to ease, the doorbell rang, breaking the fragile peace that had settled between them. Emma's stomach churned. She wasn't expecting anyone, and with everything that had been happening, she wasn't sure she was ready for any more surprises. She pulled away from Alexander, her hand instinctively going to the doorknob as the urgency in her gut rose. Who could it be? She opened the door, only to find Lena standing there. Her posture was stiff, her expression cold, but her eyes held something different, something darker, something that made Emma's heart drop. "You," Lena said sharply, her eyes narrowing as she looked at Emma. "You think you're going to take everything from me? You think you're going to just waltz in and take what's mine?" Emma stood frozen, her heart hammering in her chest. "What do you want, Lena?" Lena stepped forward, her gaze flicking to Alexander, who had remained silent behind Emma. "I want to make one thing clear, Emma," she said, her voice venomous. "You're nothing but a temporary distraction. You were always just a pawn in this game, and you'll never be good enough for him. He'll realize that eventually, and when he does, he'll come back to me." Emma's fists clenched at her sides. She had heard the bitterness in Lena's voice, but hearing it now, face to face, made something inside her snap. "I don't need your approval, Lena," she said, her voice steady despite the anger rising within her. "This isn't about you or what you think you deserve. This is about me and him. Alexander isn't yours. He never was." Lena's expression twisted with contempt, but before she could speak, Alexander stepped forward, his voice firm and commanding. "You're right about one thing, Lena," he said coldly. "This isn't about you anymore. It never was. I've made my choice. Emma is the one I want to be with. And I'm done with pretending otherwise. So you can leave now. I'm through with you." Lena's face turned pale with fury, her lips trembling with unspoken words. She opened her mouth to retort, but Alexander held up his hand, silencing her. "Leave," he repeated, his voice unwavering. With a final glare at both of them, Lena turned on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her with a force that shook the room. The silence that followed felt thick, oppressive. Emma stood there, breathless, as the reality of what had just happened settled in. For the first time, she saw Alexander not as the distant, powerful billionaire CEO, but as a man who had finally taken a stand for the person he loved. For her. The days following Lena's abrupt departure were filled with a strange mixture of quiet tension and newfound clarity. Emma had always believed that love was something she had to earn, something that was given only if she played the part well enough, kept her head down, and accepted the role life had assigned her. But in the days after that confrontation, everything had changed. Alexander's choice to stand by her, to choose her over the life he had once thought he was destined for, had shattered the walls she had so carefully built around herself. They were still living in the limbo of a contract, yes, but now, the weight of that contract no longer felt like a cage. It felt like an opportunity, a chance to build something real. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. But it was theirs, and that was enough for Emma. Her mother's condition had stabilized, and with Alexander's influence, the top medical specialists had made a world of difference. They had hope, a flicker of it, and Emma held on to that as tightly as she could. But it wasn't just the medical bills or the financial relief that had made a difference. It was the feeling of not being alone anymore. She no longer had to face the world on her own. One evening, after another long day spent at the hospital with her mother, Emma returned home to the mansion. The lights were dim, casting soft shadows across the vast expanse of the living room, but there was a sense of calm in the air, like the house was finally at peace. Alexander was waiting for her, as he often was now, his presence a comforting constant in her life. "You're late," he teased lightly as she stepped inside, but there was no malice in his tone, only the soft amusement that made Emma's heart skip a beat. "Sorry," she said with a tired smile, taking off her coat and hanging it on the hook by the door. "I lost track of time. You know how it is." She walked over to where he stood, her steps slow and deliberate. When she reached him, he didn't hesitate to pull her into his arms, holding her close for a moment, as if to reassure both of them that this was real, that they had finally found something that could endure. "I've been thinking," Alexander began, his voice soft against her ear. "About everything. About us." Emma looked up at him, her breath catching at the warmth in his eyes. "What about us?" "I want to make this official," he said, his voice steady, almost hesitant. "I want to marry you for real. Not just because of the contract, not just because of the past, but because I love you, because I can't imagine my life without you in it." Her heart swelled in her chest. For the first time, the full weight of what Alexander was offering sank in. He wasn't just offering her security or a way out of her struggles, he was offering her his heart. He had chosen her, not just out of obligation or necessity, but because he wanted her, truly and deeply. She stepped back slightly, looking up at him, her heart racing. "You mean it?" "Of course I mean it," he replied, his voice thick with sincerity. "I've always meant it. From the moment I met you, Emma, I knew I couldn't let you go. I was a fool for waiting so long to admit it, but I'm not waiting anymore." A laugh bubbled up in Emma's throat, one that was half amused, half relieved. She never thought she'd be standing here in this moment with the man who had turned her world upside down. She had started this journey terrified, desperate for a way to save her mother, and yet here she was, standing on the edge of something beautiful and terrifying all at once. "I think I can finally say that I love you too," she whispered, her eyes brimming with emotion. Alexander smiled, the weight in his gaze lifting as he pulled her back into his arms, this time holding her tightly, as if never wanting to let her go. "You've been saying that for a while," he teased, his voice light, but there was something deeper in it, a quiet promise, an unspoken vow that he intended to keep. "I'm sorry it took me so long to admit it," Emma replied with a smile. "But you made me believe in us, Alexander. You made me believe that love isn't something I have to earn. It's something I deserve." For the first time since they had met, Emma felt truly at peace. She wasn't just some pawn in someone else's game. She wasn't the sacrificial lamb to a wealthy man's whims. She was Emma, a woman who had fought for her life, her family, and her happiness. And now, she was standing on the cusp of a future she could only have dreamed of. "We'll get through this together," Alexander promised, his hand resting gently on the back of her neck, his thumb brushing over her skin in a soothing rhythm. "I know," she said softly, her voice full of warmth. "We will." They stood together in the quiet, holding each other, the weight of everything that had happened between them finally settling into something solid, something unshakable. And as the days went by, the contract between them that had once seemed so impersonal and binding was replaced by a true partnership, a real love that grew stronger with each passing day. They faced challenges: Emma's mother's health, the complexities of their relationship, the external pressures that came with being in the public eye, but they faced them side by side. They were no longer just two people bound by necessity. They were a team, a family, and the future was wide open before them. As we end this story, do you think Emma and Alexander have found their happily ever after? Or do you think there are still obstacles left for them to overcome? How do you see their future together? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for sticking with me.